My boyfriend wrote out pros and cons about whether to keep dating me, so I wrote out why he's single now. My boyfriend thought the perfect anniversary gift was showing me how he'd almost decided not to date me. And I don't mean he told a cute story about being nervous to ask me out. I mean Brad was the guy who treated commitment like a prison sentence until I finally told him I was done being his 2 a.m. backup plan. He'd been the campus golden boy who kept a rotation of girls on speed dial, the kind who'd text you up to 3 different numbers and see who responded first. Looking back, I should have known what I was getting into when he called becoming exclusive taking myself off the market, like he was doing me some huge favor. Once we were official, the real Brad started showing. At parties, he'd introduced me as his friend even though we'd been official for weeks. And when I brought it up, he told me labels were tacky. That should have been my first warning, but I was 20 and stupid and his abs had abs, so I let it slide. 3 months in, my sister's wedding rolled around, and I'd spent weeks telling Brad how excited I was for him to meet my whole family and prove I'd actually landed the campus golden boy. But the morning of the wedding, he texted that he couldn't make it because March Madness was starting and he and the boys all had parlays riding on the first games. So I spent 8 hours at that reception explaining to relatives why my boyfriend chose basketball betting over meeting them. My sister's husband just shook his head and told me that boy wasn't worth my time. But I defended Brad because that's what you do when you're convinced you're in love. Then came the incident that should have ended everything. I borrowed his phone to order Thai food and saw his group chat with the lacrosse team. They had this whole ranking system for girls at different sororities with detailed spreadsheets scoring faces, bodies, and something they called wife potential. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said it was just jokes with the boys and that every guy did this stuff. The next week, I overheard him tell his teammate Kyle that dating me was like driving a Honda when you're used to BMWs, but at least I was reliable. When I called him out, he insisted I should take it as a compliment because he was saying I was practical and low maintenance. I stayed for whatever reason. Maybe because I thought this was just how guys were, and I needed to lower my expectations. But looking back, I realized I was just afraid of being alone and starting over. Our 1-year anniversary dinner started perfectly with Tiffany earrings and good Italian food, until Brad pulled out his phone with that stupid grin and said he wanted to show me something special from when we first started dating. He showed me a photo of a whiteboard covered in his terrible handwriting with my name at the top and 2 columns underneath, labeled pros and cons. Under pros, he'd written things like hot body, great ass, lets me do whatever I want to her, other guys want her, and doesn't nag much. Under cons, he'd listed not wife material, kinda sellity, too many guy friends, gets emotional, and met on Tinder. And that's when it hit me that I'd spent a year with someone who saw me as an object instead of an actual person. He actually said, "Good thing I decided to give you a shot," and laughed like he'd show me a funny meme instead of proof he'd test-driven me like a car he wasn't sure about buying. Something shifted, but I kept smiling. Then I told him it was romantic and asked for the photo so I could keep it forever. Then I spent the next 3 days locked in my room creating my masterpiece. If Brad thought relationships were data analysis, then I'd give him a performance review he'd never forget. I made my list on quality cardstock, the kind they use for wedding invitations. I texted him Thursday and told him to meet me after his game at the quad because we needed to talk about us. I knew he'd be there with all his boys, still high off whatever testosterone nonsense happens at lacrosse practice. I showed up right as they were doing their post-game debrief, and Brad was holding court, probably retelling some play where he almost scored. I walked up and told him I'd loved his anniversary gift so much that I'd made him one too. I pulled out my list, and under pros, I'd written tall, has teeth, and owns more than 1 towel. I paused and let that sink in before telling him that was literally all I could come up with. The cons section ran 2 pages and included gems like thinks Europe is a country, cries during Fast and Furious endings, texts his mom saying, "Love you too, mommy," thinks 5'11" is 6'2", can't find the clitoris with Google Maps and a headlamp, lasts 30 seconds on a good day, wears the same underwear 3 days straight, and flexes in every reflective surface. His teammates started laughing at first, then went dead quiet as Brad's face went through every shade of red in the Crayola box. I told him when you reduce someone to a list, their value becomes obvious, and then I thanked him for teaching me this method because it really opened my eyes. I handed him the list and walked away without looking back, knowing his carefully constructed ego couldn't survive being knocked off the pedestal he'd built for himself. That night, my friends celebrated by making Brad bingo cards with squares like, says I'm not racist but, calls his ex crazy, and says he's 6 feet 2 inches tall. We played 3 rounds before someone hit blackout. Apparently he's still making those lists, wondering why no girl sticks around long enough to see what column they end up in. I'm dating someone now who writes actual love letters, not performance reviews.